Well, we're moving a little bit more towards how we might represent stories in a minute. And I want to draw a distinction between semantically driven images and stories and mechanically driven. Okay? This series of photographs was done with time-lapse photography. So let's say at 1 o'clock, no, I can't do it with 1 o'clock, at the beginning of a minute, and then beginning of a second, 0.5 of a second later, 1 second later, 1.5 later, 2 later, 2.5, 3 seconds, and so on. So even spacing photographs of a horse in motion. And these were done by a man called Edward Muybridge in the, I think, mid-19th century. Very innovative pictures. And of course, they look to us like cartoon images, don't they? They look like a cartoon that's been slowed down. So these are any instance whatevers, like we saw before, and they show us these stages in the movements of the horse. It looks like the beginning of a movie film. It's the way GIFs can be made, I believe now as well. And take that one, which is, I think it's Japanese actually, but it's manga or it's some sort of comic strip. And what is directing or separating this series of images, whereas this was mechanically driven by 0.5 second intervals or whatever, this one is semantically driven. That means to do with the meaning, because we take one character's comment. I can't read it even, I'm sorry. What's the word? Damn, men are ugly creatures. I still can't read it. I've read it before. Can you read it?
Well, after all, something is...
He's 50 years old. After all, he's 50 years old. Okay? And then the man, I could read it on...
Make my stylish long hair appeal to them. To these two? To these two.
Thank you very much. I can't read it on there either. Okay, and we've got very striking images, of course. So we're moved along, not by mechanical instants here, mechanical intervals. We're moved along by meaning, right? That's why it's semantic, semantically driven. And almost iconic images for these different attitudes. Very easily recognized images for those different attitudes. So mechanisms of movies, bearing in mind what we've just been talking about and the way we can get a series of images by mechanically separating or by semantically separating them. And you have to think about how films are made. So this is an old movie camera, I think from the 1930s or thereabouts. That's movie film. And what do you notice about the movie film itself? Right?
Into frames.
Yes, it's divided into frames, and the sides of the movie film have got little holes in. Why?
To make a series.
Yes, but it's more physical than that, the meaning. You've got to...
Connect it to the wheel.
Yes, that's right. And there are cogs that pull it through the camera, aren't they? A cog wheel, a wheel with teeth like this, and the holes sit on the teeth, and it's pulled round. Okay? And it looks a bit like a railway track, doesn't it? So I'm sure you can see some of the connections here. I know this is obvious, but sometimes we miss the significance of what is obvious. And then, of course, as we said the other day, it's not just a matter of the camera taking the pictures. There's the editing studio where cutting takes place, literally like that. You cut the film and then you kind of glue it together to make a connection between one series of images and another. And there you see something like that. I can't believe you would ever have so many different images in immediate succession like that. But that's obviously implying what goes on in editing. And that's the projection, which then takes the finished film and projects it onto the screen using a mechanism rather like this, in fact, with the cog wheel pushing the film through. And these frames, semantically driven or mechanically driven? Oh, well, that's an interesting answer. I think probably the first answer is going to be mechanically driven because each one is the same size and they each pass through the machine at the same speed because of the motor. But why is it semantically driven as well?
Well, because of the editing.
Okay, yes, the editing has a major effect then in operating with these sections. And another thing would be that as one section's followed by another, as green is interrupted by red, there's another change, a qualitative change, because we no longer see the red in the same way now that it's interrupted by green. And then red comes back. So the qualitative change comes about in the relations between these events. Does that make any sense? Is that what you meant, Alison?
Yeah, I mean, as in, if somebody is editing and cutting sections out, that it's, for me, it's similar to how the manga comic strip works almost.
Yes. Okay. Because you edit it for reasons to do with meaning, don't you? That's right, yeah.
But I suppose interestingly, it will have been put together for reasons which have nothing to do with meaning. You'll film one, you might film the end before you film the beginning, for example.
Because the location's more easy to access or something. Yes.
So on and so on.
Yes. Yes, okay. What I tried to suggest earlier on with the red and green example is that even if you have a series of reds, no greens, it looks as though it's purely uniform, but it's not exactly that. It is uniform if you look at any individual Lego brick, but when you put the series together, as I tried to show, your eye starts here, first brick, second brick, and then you lose track. Your mind runs across the series of bricks. It speeds up as it goes across, just as happens when you look at the vents up above us. Yeah.
When you have this like an example you gave in regards to the colors, moving from one set of colors to another set of colors, the picture that you have in your mind as a color when it changes, I think it still remains there for a while until your brain processes the other color. So I think for a little time we may have an amalgamation of the two colors in your head until it goes to the next one.
Sure.
So he does. So we're talking about it. Did he say about the possibility of mixing?
I think it's implied in this. So, I mean, if you look at it purely at the visual level, you see red, 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 green. And green's the opposite end of the colour spectrum from red, so it's a sharp contrast. And so you're experiencing green through red. And you know how when you look at one colour then another, the effect of the second colour is determined partly by what you've just seen. Just as when you choose clothes, you choose them in terms of how they fit with the other colours that you're wearing. Putting together. So there is relation here. This is the thing that Bergson will stress all the time. Not unitized objects, but relations between objects. And whereas unitized objects, like Lego bricks, are fixed and stable in their size and shape and so on, relations are infinitely variable, which I tried to show by putting the bricks together in different sequences. Does this make sense to you?
It does. I was just thinking that the fact that your brain will see in between the green and red, for example, may have maybe purple in between as a color, doesn't mean that the image really display that color.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, but the dubious thing in what you said is really displays that colour. Because, of course, according to conventional science and most of philosophy, you think that there is a real way to experience red or other objects and so on. But contrary to that, it may be, Bergson thinks it's the case, that we experience things in relation. So the world fundamentally is in relation. And it's not fundamentally isolated Lego blocks, it's combinations in varieties of assortments, and so on.
The idea of memory might play into this then as well. So in very simplistic terms, if you were to have that sort of series of blocks of relations and then you were to remove some of the original blocks as you would in a movie, you don't have all of the stills there at the same time. So there's an element of remembering something that then comes into the present as well.
Sure, that's absolutely right. And of course, by talking about Lego blocks and two colours, we're trying to reduce this to the most simple kind of experience, and even just in terms of seeing colours. And we're affected differently by the sequence in terms of these relations. As soon as you put more semantic content into it, so that we've got one woman's reaction, then another woman's reaction, or we've got black people, then white people, and then they shorter and shorter switches between them, you know something's going to happen, don't you? You've seen 5 minutes of the black community, 5 minutes of the white community, and gradually the alternation becomes more brief, so that you see 5 seconds of what's happening in the black home and 5 seconds of what's happening in the white home, and you know they're going to come together. There'll be some confrontation of some kind. You see, and of course, as you said, what you've just seen has such a big effect on what you go on to see. That's why we're shocked by things in films so often, or moved by them in other ways. Right. Bergson and Deleuze say that in some of our ways of storytelling, and perhaps in certain kinds of manga, certain kinds of a traditional story as well, there's a movement towards set positions, things we easily recognise, like the gun that's pointing. You've seen that in so many films. So it's a familiar scene, it's a familiar thing. We're expecting that. Or the dead body, the man being shot in the cowboy film. And he relates this to what he calls tableau vivant. And that's a French expression meaning living picture or something like that, living picture. And it's an expression we use in English, and it was a popular kind of entertainment, or kind of art form, I suppose you would say, where people would strike poses, they'd put on poses. So I'm just doing it there for you as someone who's shot in a cowboy, a Western film. But let's look at some examples. So this is not a scene from a film. These are ordinary people pretending to be in a film, pretending to have a quarrel. Okay, as a kind of dressing up game. And there's another more sophisticated one, really, because do you know what this is on the left side? Anybody? So it's a painting on the left side by Auguste Renoir, French Impressionist painter. And here you've got real people in a photograph mimicking or copying this. You can see it's real because the dog looks real. Okay, I think they've altered the appearance of the people slightly. Okay, and I'm going to embarrass Adrian a little bit now, because one day we had a colloquium with people from Brussels, or Leuven in Belgium, and you took a great big painting on the screen. The
one I used last year here, I think, as well.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. So it's the painting of the death of Socrates. Socrates taking the poison, the hemlock, and friends standing around. And what you got us to do, well, you got some volunteers from the class who came up the front, and they stood in the same picture, the same positions, the same poses. This is a pose as in the picture, just as those people are doing. And it was a very interesting experience because of the way people reacted to it, I think. It was a very interesting thing to do. And that's another one. I don't even know what this is about, but you can see it's very deliberate in front of the camera. It's not a spontaneous picture. They're standing there for a long time while the cameraman or woman gets ready with the camera. Very artificial, very contrived. And I thought you might be interested in this one. Anybody recognize who that is? Perhaps you can read. Yes? This is Derrida, believe it or not. And he was staying in a very elaborate house in Italy, and as an entertainment, he and his family, this is his son on the ground, copied this picture by Nicolas Poussin, which is from 1628, the massacre of the innocents. That means the killing of innocent children, a story from the Bible. Isn't it funny? And how people are drawn to doing these poses, a set pose, a set piece. So poses and ideal states. Now remember, a pose is not just a position, it's something that I deliberately do, like this. Or, what is it you do? Well, let's take some more, and I've risked using some examples from Japan. Japanese family. It's an old picture. It's not just a casual picture of people doing things and moving and so on. They're in a very set pose. There's a more modern version, family photograph, with, of course, presumably the deliberate wearing of the kimono and so on. And there's a more complicated one, modern wedding. The woman doesn't look Japanese to me. She looks darker than that, but I don't know. But it's a more complicated picture. And then what does this mean? Can you tell me? I mean, I've seen people do it. I don't know what it means. She's taking a picture of me now. Itsumo shashin no shinakareba narimasen. Okay. What does that mean, really? Is it? Oh, it's that, is it? I see. Okay. Can you see, though, that those are set pieces, set poses that you come back to, and they're like stabilizing moments of existence? In a sense, they're like ideal states. The family in harmony. Everything in its place. In a sense, they're like a kind of Platonism. Platonism, this is the view that Socrates comes out with, that the ordinary things we experience in the world are shadows of the real world. The real world is the world of the forms. So you and I have never seen a perfect triangle, but we all know what a perfect triangle is. So a perfect triangle, if you draw one very, very carefully, the pencil lead will still crumble. Your line will not be accurate. If you make one on the computer, the pixels would only be, will still be of a certain size. So you will never have a straight line. You'll never have a perfect angle. And yet we're all completely clear in our minds about what a triangle is. And of course, Platonism extends that to other things. How do we know that's a chair? I've never seen a chair like that before. And, okay, how do we know that? Well, because we have an idea of the chair, which means we can recognize blue ones with curved seats, as well as black ones with square seats, and one's made of iron and one's made of sand, maybe, who knows? We can recognize a chair. So it's like this attraction the human being has to ideal states is presented here. And sometimes in simple stories, that's the way the story moves, always towards those tableaus, those ideal states. I've just been shot, okay? You could recognize that clearly from the film. Well, if you looked at the piece, you found somewhere in the middle of it a very complicated kind of formula that Bergson provides. And it goes something like this. One way we can conceive of what's happening in film and what's happening in reality is that we've got immobile sections, atoms of experience, Lego blocks, okay? And those are put together in various kinds of relations. Another way we can think of reality and experience is that we haven't got Lego blocks, but we've got combinations of Lego blocks in relation. And the relations are the things that are fundamental. The sugar dissolving in the water accelerated by the spoon. We've got things in relation, and that relates to qualitative change. So these are different ways of looking at the world. This is the kind of popular scientific way of thinking, that we've got atoms that fit together in various ways and can be changed. This is seeing things already in relation. Relations are fundamental. And Bergson says that this is really an error, and this is more true to the way things are. And this, of course, relates to duration. This relates to chronological time.
So Bergson would be opposed to the Platonic picture.
Yes, that's right. So the Platonic picture wants things. This isn't what Plato thinks, it's what Socrates says, okay? The Platonic picture would have everything like Lego blocks, okay? Perfect forms. Not things in relation. And relation implies change. Remember, relation also implies time is moving through these things. There is the sugar dissolving in the water, not sugar plus water, then change. It's the whole thing together, the relation. I wonder if this is helping or making it worse.